Hey, I'm Julie Brewer. I'm the Executive Director of United Community Services of Johnson County. We've been around for going on 60 years now. We're a planning partner with Johnson County government, with United Way of the United Way of Greater Kansas City. We work with agencies. We work across sectors, and we've been working the last 4+ years around safe, stable, and attainable housing as a health equity issue. As a matter of fact, we're the convener with the cities and the county on the recently produced Johnson County Housing Study and Housing for All Toolkit. And some of you or some of your members may have participated in the Housing Toolkit Task Force that we ran virtually last year. So I'm going to jump right in and hopefully have time at the end for questions. Just to do a little bit of a level set, you will find in this presentation and comments that I'm going to be making that we look at landlords, especially local landlords and property managers, especially for units of less than 20, so medium to smaller size rental, to be very important members of our community and very important members of the housing landscape. So I'm super excited that I'm able to spend some time with you guys this evening. So we went through a process in forming what's called the Johnson County Health Equity Leadership Team. We brought in, over the course of this grant, a little over $400,000 of grant dollars into this community to look at this issue and to work with our cities, who then came alongside and amongst the 19 communities in the county invested about $100,000 of their dollars into this 4+ year work that we've been doing. This just gives you an idea of the different sectors that we had around the table as we looked at a priority issue around safe, stable, attainable housing as a health issue for folks in Johnson County. We went through and are still in an ongoing multi-year process that first did the research to identify a health equity issue. Housing was that health equity issue. Worked with building information of what that meant, worked with talking to stakeholders around what different things needed to be done, did the work around launching a housing study and then a housing task force and then a housing toolkit. We're still working in this space. We're working with planning commissioners on educating them, because if you think about who has a role when we think about different developments and jurisdictions outside of your elected city councils and board of county commissioners, certainly it's your appointed planning commissioners. So we've been working with Mark in a bi-state way around educating planning commissioners around their role around housing. You know, all this is kind of just to level set this. A big part of who we are as an organization is we do a lot of the data analysis and research, and then convening and planning. We're a planning organization kind of at the core, and we do some resource allocation. So certainly just to level set, we know in our county that almost 40% of our renters are cost burdened in their housing, meaning that they're paying more than 30% of their income on their housing cost. And we know for homeowners with a mortgage, that's around 18% are cost burdened in their housing. And this is looking at the most recently available census data, which is the 2019 census data. The 2020 data has been held back, the American Community Survey data. There's a little too much noise in that data, so they're working through that. So what I'm taking you through now is just some of the data that really helped us to elevate housing as the priority health issue. So certainly we know when you're spending the majority of your income on your housing, you're not spending it on other things, be it your healthcare, food, childcare, and it makes you more fragile, right, as a household when something unforeseen happens. We also know when we look at average home sale price between 2017 and 2020, that it went up over 19%. That's not a surprise for any of our landlords who might have been in the process of acquiring property during that time frame, that sticker shock. And when you compare that to where incomes were of some of our kind of what we call our foundational jobs over the same time, about 40% of jobs in Johnson County fall into three key areas: food prep and food service, retail and customer service, and office administration. Here, we kind of took a look at those jobs that, at least during the pandemic, we keep on calling essential worker jobs, and said, what does it look like for that income? So we know that housing costs have outpaced income growth. As a matter of fact, this is a lot of data on this slide, so I apologize. But one thing that our cities really have poured over, and that we try to update, and we need to update again for 2021 data. But when you look at some of those key jobs and we look at median rent, we ask, are we creating a dynamic that leaves more and more folks behind in different job categories when we talk about what it looks to be able to access the ability to rent in a community. And we know that's disproportionate based on an individual's income level. For instance, we know that folks that are making less than $20,000 a year, 90% of them are going to be cost burdened in their housing, or extremely cost burdened, which is more than 50% of their income going into their housing cost. So all of that really pointed to housing as a priority health issue, right? And really what led us to launch the housing study. There hadn't been a housing study done in Johnson County since 2004. So you can imagine that was pre the Great Recession. Now we're in the middle of the Great Resignation. So that's another, we seem to have, life altering moments. But we launched the housing study. That housing study included focused listening sessions. Now we're in the pandemic. This was launched in 2020, predominantly through Zoom, with about 175 folks around the community. And then we also had an online, and we had a paper survey that was available at agencies and community centers and libraries in locations that were had a higher probability of having limitations for those residents to online. So we had over 4,600 folks participated in the resident survey, disproportionately owner versus renter. That's one of the areas that we want to tap in with chatting with you guys, because we know, and we have data that shows what that breakdown between renter and homeowner is for Johnson County. So we know that we're skinny on the renter side. Here's some of the community perspectives that came out of that resident survey and the focused listening group. So together, between the focused listening groups and the resident survey, around 5,000 voices were heard in our county. So different things that we looked at were what percent of respondents who believe that the county has adequate housing options for different types of households. And as you can see, really focus on those skinnier numbers. So only 31% of the county feel like we've got housing solutions for students who are working and living independently outside of a parent's house. Only 19 believe we have enough housing solutions for those individuals who have disabilities. Only 15% of the community respondents felt we have enough housing solutions for workers that are making less than $16 an hour. And only 15% of the respondents felt like we have housing solutions that are near transit, mass transit opportunities. We also looked at things like construction activity over the last decade, so between 2010 and 2019. And so we know that the multifamily construction just slightly outpaced single family construction in the county over that time frame. And then we're always looking to the future. So we said, we looked, what is the population that's being projected for 2030, which when we began the survey, right, the work, that was going to be a decade from now. Now we're into 22, so it's really only 8 years from now. And we're getting close to 700,000 as the projected population for the county. Taking a deeper dive into the construction activity over the last decade. So you can kind of see the gray bar is single family, the kind of bright blue bar is multifamily. So you can see over time, as we go on in years and get closer to the present, that multifamily really saw some jumps and started to outpace single family home construction for the county. Then we asked our respondents, what types of housing do they think would be successful in the county? And so you can see mid-size housing, 3-bedroom housing really was the highest vote getter. But some things that people maybe haven't thought about also really piqued interest, such as cottage court, having housing solutions that are on smaller lots. That's smaller housing in a court where you maybe share a central yard and have a sidewalk cutting up, and maybe don't have a garage or have a detached garage. Accessory dwelling units, we know that we have a few of our jurisdictions that are taking a serious look at allowing accessory dwelling units as a housing solution component that's allowable. Row housing, apartments even got over half, and we know there's a lot of pushback sometimes for high density multifamily in certain communities. And then I think it's also important to think about when we talk about those who are modest to low income. Sometimes we think those jobs are populated by predominantly our kids as a second job while they're going to school. Well, I always say to folks who think it's their high schooler who's the only one that's working at a restaurant, that restaurant is open during school hours, who's in those jobs at that time. So when you look, we do have folks across the age spectrum that are in jobs that bring home less than $1,250 a month. And then we also look at that in and out commuter data on who lives elsewhere and works in the county, lives and works in the county, or lives in the county and commutes out to another job outside the county. This is taking a deeper dive at that housing, jobs, and transportation, kind of that sweet spot. And this is something we've talked to Mass Transit about. This is a heat map. So the darker areas are where predominantly there's a higher concentration of more modest wage jobs. And as you can see, they fall along, not unsurprisingly, our major transportation corridors. So then you think of that trifecta of having workforce housing near jobs that are more modestly paid along major transportation routes. And could we remedy a transportation solution that meets the needs of those for whom a car is a barrier? So that's certainly an opportunity there. Looking at some of the Johnson County rental data highlights, this is where I showed that our respondents were not proportionate to the number of renters we have in our community. This data, and this is 2018 5-year data, that study was kicked off in 2020, shows that over 30% of households in the county are renters. And the heat map, or the next to it, shows the darker the areas show the greater proportion of different areas in the community where renting is a higher concentration. So, and I'm sure you're not surprised to know that Overland Park and Lenexa, their mix is more 40% renters, 60% homeowners. And I think Mission and Merriam are another pocket where your rental data is higher than maybe other areas of the county. Ultimately, the study and I gave Brendan links to the study so that you guys could take a deeper dive. The study is really laid out pretty logically. It gives an executive summary in the front. It looks at countywide data. Then it looks at individual jurisdictions. So if you have the majority of your properties in a particular city, you can just look at that city level data. And then it gives recommendations and has links to case studies of what's going on in other parts of the country, primarily in the Midwest, that links to some of the recommendations that we put into the study of things that are working to address this need for what we really, some of the aha moments out of the study was really that missing middle, that you look at housing as stages And there are communities that really don't have different links to the chain. As a matter of fact, we've done quite a few city council presentations and board of county commissioners, and we deal with a bit of not in my backyard when we talk about rental property or higher density multifamily property. And I'll ask a room, raise your hand, how many of you began your housing journey as a renter? And the vast majority began their housing journey as a renter, just to kind of stop and center and think about, why are we othering when we think about renters and the importance and the value of renters in a community? So with that study, we moved on to the Housing for All task force. We were able to stand up more than 100 community members. Now we're into 2021. We're still in the pandemic. So we had to switch to an all virtual option. So I give a lot of kudos to all the community members who we had evening sessions around unpacking the recommendations from the housing study and really looking at what are some things that were recommended moving forward. This is not a one-size-fits-all study or toolkit for the county, because our smallest city is 195 folks and our largest city is more than 200,000 folks. And we have some cities that are fully built out and other cities that still have a lot of green space. This is really a lot of different recommendations that can be customized depending on your jurisdiction. We were able to boil down the housing study recommendations to really 5 goals: preserve and rehabilitate existing housing stock. We feel that local, smaller, more modest landlord, so meaning that 4 units and below, or maybe 10 units and below, we feel you guys play an incredibly important role in preserving and rehabilitating and maintaining existing housing stock and keeping that in the housing inventory for residents in our community. Another goal is how do we reduce overall household expenses so housing is more affordable? How do we increase the variety of housing product, especially middle density? How do we incentivize? And middle density, we mean, we feel across most of our jurisdiction, there's a real need for more duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, that kind of, instead of single family to large multifamily, that buffer of smaller density multifamily. And then increasing production of affordable and attainable housing stock by sharing risk. We heard a lot from developers. We heard a lot from jurisdictions. We heard a little bit from lenders, and not enough from landlords about what the market looks like and how do you retain and incentivize action in that market. And then building the resident willpower and voice for residents who really want to be a part of how do we create attainable housing solutions and choice across all stages and ages of life. We were realistic on the barriers, everything from what we talked about, the NIMBYism, to what zoning and restrictions look like, financial risk looks like. You know, today you already got a presentation on another lending product. So how do you address those pinch points, like you were talking about with the earlier presenter on making different lending products more accessible? And then we even have in the toolkit, how do you measure if you're being successful? What are the things that you're targeting and how do you measure your success? Finally, part of the reason that I'm super excited to talk to you guys is the now that we did a lot of that heavy lifting and have given a lot of that work back to the jurisdictions to be thoughtful about of what they're going to do individually in their own communities, we are still, as the Johnson County Health Equity Network, staying and at the request of a lot of our community partners, are retaining some of the activity work around housing. One of which is creating some learning circles in individual jurisdictions around how do you get across the line some of the needs that are identified. We would love to have some local landlords around our table educating folks and being part of the voice. We feel local landlords are vital to the housing continuum in our community. once again, when we see local landlords go away, you divest of your properties, outside investors come in. Sometimes that property is sat on as an investment and there's not even somebody moving in and in that property because it's only looked at as an investment, and then you totally remove that from even the housing landscape. Or, when you think of having outside investors or outside landlords, if you're doing this as a business and you make an income, why wouldn't I as a community want to retain you as a local landlord so that you can continue to spend that income in my community? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe that'll be a good launching off point. I will just point out that within the housing study and the toolkit are links to real solutions that are going on in a very creative way in different communities in the Midwest and across the US that are making real inroads in what is a housing crisis across the country. So I'd love just to kind of get some reaction or get some thoughts, or see if there's anyone who is really who's interested in maybe joining our table and helping us understand the perspective and the world of a landlord at a deeper level, and what are ways that we can collaborate better together.
Well, the only thing I can say is your last point was well taken. It seems that many in our community, not so much Johnson County, but other areas of our community, there seems to be a war on landlords, which I see as counterproductive to the whole ecosphere. And kudos to Johnson County to not really stand in that space, but it does make it difficult to be a landlord and provide quality housing if there are actions taken that try to deny us the ability to do that and make any kind of living or any kind of income. I wouldn't say a living, but income at all. So that's an important thing you brought up. So,
well, and Dale, we have shared that in our city presentations because we want jurisdictions to be thoughtful. When we think about the pandemic and we think about some of the intentional remedies for small business owners, because cities value small business owners as a part of their economic development spectrum, we try to give voice that we look at landlords as a small business owner, right? And although our agency is very much engaged, because we are at the heart, we address health and human service issues. So we're around the table on helping. And next month, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're presenting specifically on our work around the Kansas emergency rental and utility assistance and emergency housing vouchers and some of that. But we try to give voice to the fact that when there was a moratorium on evictions, that also materially impacted the landlords who also had mortgages, who also had bills to pay, who also had to figure out what their pathway looked going forward. And we think it's a lot more effective, and this is why we're grounded in planning in our work, to bring all the voices to the table so we're all a part of discussing a good path forward rather than othering. And Stacy Johnson Cosby and I have had a lot of conversations, and certainly there's a need for tenants' rights, but sometimes we have a tendency to put everybody into the same bucket, right? And not distinguish when you've got some good business practices and some earnest work being done from when you have maybe some not so great business practices, and you have unintended consequences. And I think in some cases, the unintended consequences is to disproportionately impact a local smaller landlord. And that's what we'd like to avoid.
I personally like the fact that, Julie, you guys are standing kind of like what you said in the middle of everything, because that's what I think we've always wanted is we want people to see our side just like they want us to see their side. And so us as landlords, we're willing to do whatever we can. We want to keep housing affordable. Obviously, it's our best interest to keep it affordable as well, as long as we can make it. And to Dale's point, as far as like some of these cities, or, you know, to keep it affordable, you can't do that by adding more licensing fees and raising property taxes and things like that, because all that gets passed on to the tenants. But on the other hand, I know that tenants just want us to see them, you know, not only as a source of income, but there's people out there working really hard to keep their housing. And I mentioned on a meeting this morning that, you know, with all the unemployment and some people taking advantage of the system, there's a lot of people out there that are working hard to keep their housing, to make their rent payments. And I commend them, because a lot of them, they work hard to keep that going. And so, but there's always this disconnect between the two groups. And I think there are solutions out there to help and mitigate some of this. And so I think it's great, the study that was done and all the information that we can come together and figure out a good solution to keep that housing product. You know, this is a community I live in, and I know that the rental housing and just having that is a big producer in keeping the community the way I want it to be. You know, I don't want it to be run down and things like that. So this is you know, I think working together is the only way to get all that done.
So we would love, you know, and if subsequent to this meeting, if folks can let Brendan know if you'd be interested in being involved in this work, we want to make sure your voice is heard. And what you said about being a local landlord and you're a part of the community, we want to help underscore that, especially for our cities as they're thoughtful about their own work in this housing space. Don't overlook the importance of that local landlord, because you guys are, like I said, you're the whole low-hanging fruit in as far as having some single, some duplexes, some tri and quadplexes in neighborhoods that connect families with great school districts. That is maybe a family stepping stone, right, to their forever home.
Group, we are the landlording group of Johnson County, just landlord focused. That's what we focus on all the time. That's what we educate about. And so we really need to be involved in some of these programs as much as possible as a group.